Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to finally give my review of the Aurelion Sol CGU, and honestly, I can admit that I was wrong about some of the things that I was critical of. When I first did my review of Aurelion Sol's CGU kit, there were a lot of things that I wasn't particularly a fan of. I thought Breath of Light seemed like a bit of a pipe dream ability, like enemy champions were really just going to stand there and let you breathe fire on them. I thought Astral Flight was another ability that seemed interesting on paper, but what was the point of it when, okay, sure, you can fly and breathe fire, but why would you ever want to do that? And there were some things that I quite liked, and I think I liked the kit more as we received more details of it. But I didn't really know what to think until I actually had an opportunity to play with a champion and sort of get a better idea about how he works. So anyways, I think that Riot have actually done a reasonably good job of making a kit that actually feels cohesive, but also does, admittedly, make Aurelion Sol feel more dragony. Primarily, this is because Breath of Light is his only main damage source ability. Singularity does a small amount of damage, obviously there's Execute attached to it, but because Singularity does light damage and Astral Flight does no damage, Breath of Light is what Aurelion Sol uses for the vast majority of his damage. And there's not really anything you can say about an ability not being dragony enough than Aurelion Sol being forced to rely on his draconic breath weapon for the vast majority of the damage that he deals. That's pretty fluffy. Astral Flight has also sort of impressed me as a way to help resolve some of the issues with Aurelion Sol's kit. Obviously, there's a bit of a problem with Aurelion Sol trying to stand still and breathe fire on somebody, but obviously you're standing still trying to breathe fire on somebody. That can be a very difficult proposition for a squishy caster champion like Aurelion Sol, and as a result, I think that there are actually applications for Astral Flight because you can use it to be able to DPS while also staying on the move to keep you at least a little bit mobile, which I do quite like, and I think it's a very interesting way for the champion to actually play. I think it overall works, and there's a point for it to be in the kit, and so even though I initially thought it was just a really dumb thematic way that Riot were trying to make Aurelion Sol feel like a dragon, there is a reason for it to exist on the kit, which I do quite appreciate. Aurelion Sol, I think, feels like a late-game mage as well. The Stardust slowly making Aurelion Sol's abilities much stronger throughout the game is one of the very noticeable things about him. Astral Flight starts as a very dinky range ability and eventually starts becoming the sort of semi-global ranged ability that it used to be, which is very powerful and allows Aurelion Sol to make kind of sort of the same roaming plays that he used to. He can't really do it in lane anymore, but he can certainly start doing it towards the later stages of the game. The AoE increase on Singularity and Falling Star as well really allow Aurelion Sol to feel very powerful as the game goes on in a noticeable way as you see the AoEs grow stronger, which I do quite enjoy. Now, Falling Star as well, the transformation of the Sky's Descent works a little differently than I expected it to. I thought it would be a permanent transformation when you reach a certain amount of Stardust throughout the game, but instead it's like a meter. You have to, when you learn the ability, you start filling the meter with Stardust, and when you hit a certain amount, it transforms, you cast it, and then it reverts back to Falling Star until you fill the meter up again. I'm not entirely clear if I like this or not. On one hand, I think it's a good way of allowing Aurelion Sol to access the coolest, splashiest ability on his kit multiple times throughout the game, especially in the early stages of the game. But at the same time, I think that there are some feels bad moments to it, especially when you're sort of like, hey team, don't fight because I don't have my big slamming ultimate already at this point. It reminds me very similarly of old Cho'Gath and the way Feast used to work, where if Cho'Gath died, he lost half his stacks, so he'd then spend the next couple of minutes just pressing R on minions to get back to his full health size, so he's perfectly ready for a fight to happen. It feels very similar to that, where Aurelion Sol players will say, hey, don't fight, I don't have the Sky's Descent yet. The timer, though, is quite longer. It's longer than just a couple of minutes that Cho'Gath would need, so I'm of two minds about it. I think it was a fair compromise by Riot to allow Aurelion Sol to access godlike power in the earlier stages of the game without making it overwhelming and not locking it behind the sort of late-game threshold that he may or may not ever get to. If you only ever got it past 35 minutes, well, not every game goes that late, but overall I think it works well enough for the kit. And this overall then means that I think Aurelion Sol's kit actually feels decent to play. There are enough internal synergies that I quite like the way it performs. He always feels very dragony, and even his big space abilities in Singularity and Falling Star, I think synergize very well with the rest of his kit. Slow someone with Singularity, drop a star on them for the stun, and then the whole time they're stunned, you're breathing fire on them for the increased damage. That's kind of a cool play that Aurelion Sol gets to make. Now, not everything is great with this kit. I do think that there are some issues that Aurelion Sol has that aren't even necessarily major issues, and I do think that spending more time with the champion will certainly help me learn him a little bit better. But one of the major issues is Astral Flight is just sort of awkward to use as a combat ability. Obviously, you have to sort of choose the direction that you want to be traveling in as you use it, but if you're using it to help close the gap to actually then breathe fire on somebody, you're walking directly at the enemy team as a squishy backliner. That's not necessarily ideal, but if you take it at an angle, you might find yourself flying away from the enemies that you're trying to damage, and as a result, it just ends up making Astral Flight feel like a very difficult ability to use, in part due to Breath of Light's fairly limited range. Breath of Light is not the longest of ranged abilities. It does have a decent range, but I honestly wish it had like 50 more range because I was almost consistently just a little tiny bit out of the range that I wish I was able to be in to damage enemy champions with. Maybe that would make Breath of Light too overpowered if it had that slight bit of extra range, but it's just a little bit too short range than I want it to. Part of the issue as well is using Astral Flight to get in range for a Breath of Light means that you slow yourself as you start channeling Q, which means that if you're not in range when you start channeling the Q, you slow yourself down, therefore keeping yourself out of range of the enemy champion that you're trying to damage the whole time unless you cancel the Astral Flight or the Breath of Light in order to get resume flying. There are just some difficulties and issues with the Aurelion Sol's kit. I don't think these are insurmountable issues. These may just be skill problems or not knowing the champion well enough at this point, but certainly Astral Flight is a bit of a frustrating ability as it's intended to answer the problem of Breath of Light requiring a channel, and it doesn't entirely do that. Similarly, Singularity has the pullback and slow, but it doesn't feel that powerful in terms of keeping an enemy champion in your range, and the range isn't that great, meaning that if you clip an enemy champion at the maximum range to it, they'll be able to walk out of it by the time you walk into range to start breathing fire on them, and because of the delay on Astral Flight, they're probably already out of the Singularity by the time you started to take flight and fly after them to breathe fire on them. There are just some issues with the way the kit works. It doesn't entirely line up the way I realistically want it to, though I do think that generally speaking, it's in an okay spot. Part of the issue as well, of course, with Aurelion Sol is that he has to stand still for the vast majority of his damage. This isn't necessarily a problem. I think this is an intended weakness of the champion, and this is why I've had people say that he does too much damage, but he's a champion that has to stand still for all of his damage. If the Aurelion Sol is allowed to stand still for 3 to 4 seconds in a team fight, you probably deserve to lose that team fight because he just got to DPS freely. He also has the weakness of not being able to set himself up very effectively. All of his plays are relatively telegraphed. Singularity doesn't have that high of a range, nor does Breath of Light. Falling Star is okay, but it's very telegraphed, meaning that Aurelion Sol is sort of dependent on having a front line to step up and make space for him and to start a fight that then Aurelion Sol can follow up with by dropping a Singularity and Falling Star on the enemy champions that are already CC'd or grouped up on his melee champion, right? I think that there are a lot of things that potentially could make him feel a little bit better to play, but these all seem to be deliberate weaknesses. They do feel bad, however, at least at the sort of outset of learning new Aurelion Sol. But generally speaking, I think that the kit is probably fine, and it may just be a practice thing. One of the other issues I think I take with Aurelion Sol is the fact that he feels like Riot tried to combine two really good ideas, Dragon Champion and Space Mage, into a singular concept that can't really do either of them particularly well. I think that Aurelion Sol feels dragon-y enough, but I also feel like Space Mage is a really cool concept, and Riot have already used some of their best concepts in Aurelion Sol's kit, Singularity and Falling Star, of course, which then leads to Aurelion Sol feeling like this weird portmanteau of two different champions that might have been better as their own ideas, and I sort of slightly wonder if it would have been better to make a traditional dragon champion do something like Kadrigrin the Ruined, who even has the angle of being sort of a necro dragon, to be your dragon champion and keep Aurelion Sol as a dedicated space mage might have been a better approach to it, though I know Riot really wanted Aurelion Sol to be the League of Legends dragon champion, and that they like subverting expectations wherever possible to say, yeah, Aurelion Sol's a dragon, but also he's a space mage, that's important to him, in a similar fashion to Yorick is a shovel monk fighter guy, but he's also League of Legends necromancer, right? You're not going to have a cloth robe necromancer in League of Legends because that already exists. His name is Yorick. Maybe a similar thing here, but it bothers me at the very least because I feel like there could have been some cooler kit designs that could have come out of a dedicated space mage or a dedicated dragon kit. But these are nitpicks. I think that the CGU did a very admirable job of giving Aurelion Sol a little bit more to play with and a little bit more of an intelligible playstyle. I certainly think he still has a unique playstyle. He does a lot of things that no other champion really does, and as a result, I hesitate to call the CGU a success. I do feel like Riot gave up too quickly on Aurelion Sol's old kit, but I do think that the new kit works very well with the character and plays very well, and as a result, it's hard for me to say that it was a failure as well. But those are my thoughts. You'll have to let me know what you think of Aurelion Sol down in the comments section below, especially what you've been building on him and how you've been playing him. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.